Hello there and welcome to The World Today on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are. Here are our top stories at this hour. Now, Israel's Prime Minister has vowed the campaign in Gaza will continue until quiet and security are returned to the citizens of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu issued the statement after Israel's 7-hour humanitarian window for parts of Gaza closed. The truce slowed violence in Gaza, although Palestinians said Israel broke it by hitting a house in Gaza City. 2 attacks on Israelis were reported in Jerusalem, and Israel said militant rocket fire from Gaza had continued.
On Sunday, August 3rd, Israel carried out yet another round of offensives on Gaza. Unfortunately, another UN school was hit in less than a week since the first school was attacked. Just as the case was during the first attack, the condemnations came pouring in.
There is no evidence whatsoever that there were militants inside the school. There's no evidence that there were militants firing rockets from inside the school. In international law, you have to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. You have to consider the proportionality. Is the risk of civilians being killed worth it?
In Jerusalem, Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Peter Lerner claimed he didn't endorse the attack on the school and gave the assurance that Israel was determined to figure out what happened.
Indeed, in the hours of this morning, the IDF targeted a group of terrorists on a motorcycle, at least 2 people that were adjacent to the school in high speed. We struck them, and we're currently looking into the consequences of this strike. I can confirm that our target was taken out. Indeed, we're investigating the situation. We will get to the bottom of this, and once we do, we will make our conclusions public.
The Hamas spokesman, Sami Abu Zuri, however, took a different approach.
Ban Ki-moon made it legitimate for the killer and the criminal by mourning the death of the Israeli soldier, the killer, and he ignored the blood of the innocent civilian people under occupation who are being killed in every minute, even while taking shelter in the schools. Ban Ki-moon is responsible.
In the meantime, Israel says tunnels like this one are used by Palestinian militants to infiltrate the country and carry out attacks. The army said it was discovered when Islamists were seen emerging from it. The militants and 5 soldiers were killed in the fighting. Destroying these tunnels is Israel's main mission in Gaza. The army says the operation is nearly complete and is winding down the offensive. More than 1,700 Palestinians and dozens of Israeli soldiers have been killed in Israel's 3-week campaign launched in response to Palestinian rocket attacks. A 7-hour truce is in effect in parts of Gaza to allow hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians to return home and let aid in. Despite the brief lull, Palestinians accuse Israel of breaking the ceasefire by bombing a house. Israeli tanks and troops may be redeployed along the Gaza border, but they are prepared to resume strikes in response to any attacks by the Palestinians.
Now, still talking about Gaza, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa, Arthur Lenk, has brushed off calls for him to be expelled from the country over the crisis in the Middle East. Now, he was speaking at a support rally organized by the South African Zionist Federation in Johannesburg at the weekend. In the Middle East crisis, there was clashes outside the venue of the rally, but the situation was quickly contained. Now, that adds to a number of pro- and anti-Israeli protests across South Africa owing to the recent flare-up of the Middle East crisis. Our correspondent Betty Dibia was there and now reports.
One of the many protests in major cities across South Africa, and the issue, the Middle East crisis.
SICP calls on all peace-loving people and the workers of the world to unite against the oppression and violation of the human rights of the Palestinian people.
Some also echo the call of some groups for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador to the country, Arthur Lenk.
Push for our government to sever all ties with the Zionist apartheid state and expel the Israeli ambassador Atalin and recall the South African ambassador in Tel Aviv, Sister Gomba.
And in another part of the city, A coalition of groups gathered for what they called the Solidarity Peace Rally for Israel.
Today is fundamentally an appeal for peace, an appeal to the people of the Middle East, an appeal to the Palestinians to say, wake up! The Palestinians, the Jews are not your enemies.
The Jewish Board of Deputies and the South African Zionist Federation, joined by many religious and political interest groups in support of Israel and its actions in Gaza. The Israeli ambassador Arthur Lenk brushed aside calls for his expulsion from the country, saying the voices must join those for peace.
Call for peace. Stand up for Hamas. Stand up for a two-state solution. Things can be better for our Palestinian neighbors and for Israel.
Just outside this venue where the rally is being held, another group, a Jewish body, started what was supposed to be a peaceful protest, but that didn't go too well. The security operatives quickly contained the situation before it degenerated. Meanwhile, Israel continues bombardment of Gaza targets along with a short humanitarian ceasefire, which Hamas rejects. Hamas is part of peace talks, which Israel is not attending.
In the same way that the Nigerian government can't negotiate with Boko Haram, Israel can't negotiate with Hamas. You need to have people who are reasonable on the other side in order to negotiate with. So we're all longing for peace.
The struggle has to continue until the Israeli conquest comes to an end.
Interestingly, on both sides of the divide, everybody is calling for peace. But how to achieve that peace, get a piece of land, and the land of peace, has always been the hard nut to crack. From Linksfield in Johannesburg, South Africa, I'm Betsy Dibe reporting for Channels Television News.
Now, today is a very big day in Britain as royals and world leaders have gathered for ceremonies marking 100 years since Britain joined World War I. The Prince of Wales and David Cameron attended a service in Glasgow, while the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are in Belgium with many heads of state. About 17 million soldiers and civilians were killed between 1914 and 1918.
Surrounded by statues honoring fallen Allied soldiers, world leaders on Monday arrived at the Belgian city of Liege to remember the outbreak of World War I. The first land battle took place in Liege. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge arrived shortly before French President François Hollande. Prince William was among the dignitaries who later made a speech during the ceremony. Also in attendance were the British Prime Minister as well as his Australian counterpart who voiced their thoughts.
This event had a massive impact on every community, on every family in our country. It helped shape our world. The scale of the slaughter was immense. So it's right to remember for those reasons. But it's also right to remember the outbreak of the war because so many young British people thought that they were rallying to a cause of defending the right of a small country, Belgium, to exist and the prevention of the domination of Europe by one power. There were principles and thoughts that were in play at that time that are worth remembering today as well.
It was a terrible war. In one sense, a tragic waste. But it was for a good cause. For us at least, World War I was not a war of conquest, it was a war of freedom. It was a war for our allies, for our values. And those who died, they fell with their mates doing what they honestly believed was the right thing.
The memorial service was held at the city's St. Symphorien Cemetery, one of the few war cemeteries where German and Allied soldiers were buried side to side. The First World War was declared on July 28, 1914, when Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Germany invaded neutral Belgium on August 4, 1914, a day after declaring war on France. Britain declared war on Germany on August 4.
We gather as citizens of the Commonwealth to join in this service of commemoration. We meet because on a summer's day like this one, 100 years ago, the world changed.
The United States entered officially in April 1917, declaring war on Germany. 9 million soldiers died. Millions more civilians also died.
Well, stay with us on the world today. Still to come, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake claims at least 398 lives in China. We'll have details for you shortly. Please stay with us.